What's up, everybody? It's Phil here. What's up, everyone? Phil here, episode 9 of the Death of Narratives podcast. We're going to be talking about a bunch of stuff, touching on the Iran war, maybe touching on Trump's visit with Xi. A lot of things going on, but once again, I'm going to do a bit of a reflection on something that's happened in my life. So let's get right into it. Episode 9, Death of Narratives podcast. So recently, I'm working on this farm, and we did a slaughter day. We slaughtered about 1,300 stew hens. It was a lot of work. I've been working like 12-hour days, 11-hour days, back to back to back. So I'm very tired. But I was reflecting on something because there was this dude Amos who. We're in Pennsylvania, so you have the Pennsylvania Dutch, the Amish, the Mennonite, and many other sects and religious beliefs and communities of the like. And they came and they did, they helped us slaughter. We slaughtered, but they helped do evisceration mostly. So when you slaughter chickens, you have to crate them, catch them, put them in a crate, move them over to where you're going to process them. You kill them, you slit their neck, let the blood drain out. You scold them, put them in super hot water, and then defeather them, pluck all their feathers. And then you cut the head off, cut the feet off, cut a hole around its cloaca. Now this is evisceration. That's what you do. Take all of its guts out, basically, which is probably the most. I think there's machines for plucking feathers, and scalding helps with that. But the evisceration is probably the hardest part because it's the most manual part you have to do. You don't want to puncture any intestines or the gallbladder or any weird parts of the chicken, or else you'll get poop everywhere, which is pretty unsanitary for meat. So that's probably the hardest thing to do. So they came. We hired them, but they came and helped us do that. Mostly evisceration, and they were like pretty rocking and rolling. It's pretty impressive to see. This dude Amos and two women, Martha, and I can't remember the other lady's name, and then two other employees of his, which I think were in the community, then out of the community, then kind of came back a little bit. And yeah, pretty interesting. Just reflecting on like how a lot of people think that they are backwards or conservative or weird, and that the way that the rest of people in America or the developed Western nations live is not weird and progressive and secular and democratic and not conservative. And I was just reflecting on that because the more and more you get to farming, the more and more you realize that they really have it figured out. The more and more because we're certified organic at this farm, so we have to go through all these regulations. We have a billionaire or 100 millionaire or whatever funding us. It's like a farm foundation. We donate all our produce, so it's just a lot of regulations, a lot of like processes and systems and data recording that you wouldn't have to do on other farms. Which some of it is good and useful and necessary, but a lot of it is bloat. And there's certain things that if you were just farming on your land with your community and your family, you'd be able to do. But here you can't do, or you have to get a sign off from somebody to do it, or like put in Slack. Like we're on Slack all the time on this farm. Like that's how crazy this farm is. We're on Slack on a farm. It's never happened to me that I'm on my phone inputting stuff in a Slack on a farm. So it's sort of like a tech startup in a farm, like had a baby. It's kind of weird, but yeah, in comparison to how the Amish do it, and the Pennsylvania Dutch and the Mennonites and all the related sects and communities, which it is, I think, a myth that they don't use technology, because I mean, what is technology? Technology is just tools, right? So they use shovels. That's a tool. That's a form of technology, But they don't. They reject certain parts of modernity, industrialized society, that other cultures, like the rest of us, don't, because we're born into, and so are they born into. And we, for some reason, think that is backwards, But I was just looking at these people, and they're wearing these old-timey clothes, which seem actually very high quality. And they're not filled with plastics, I'm sure. And they all have like these amazing skills to physically produce things from the land that a lot of us don't have. And they're all very good at it because they do it often. A lot of us don't do that. And there was a sort of weird tension of like, ooh, these women aren't really talking very much, but like, are they like put down a lot? It's conservative, religious kind of thing. And I don't know. I was just struck. They were like singing songs, like Jesus is the way or whatever, the whole time, and it was very wholesome. And I was sort of struck by how wholesome it is and how impressive it is, and how it seems like they have it figured out a little bit more than a lot of us in a weird way. And I didn't necessarily expect to think that, but I'm reminded of my roommate Amy, this girl who's starting to farm this year. It's her first year farming, and she was telling me a story about how she's sort of gay, and sort of straight, sort of gay, classic American woman thing. And she is friends with my coworker and his girlfriend, Kevin and Lauren, and how that they were, I guess they're Christian, to a certain extent, a bit religious. And she was like hanging out with them, and she just sort of didn't realize that, and was sort of in their home and like realizing all this Christian symbology, and ideology that they follow, and sort of like for a minute like scared, because she's not heteronormative in that way, she's not super straight, so scared as a knee-jerk reflex to be like, oh, are these people going to hate me or condemn my lifestyle in some sort of way, but then sort of confused after that because she realized, well, no, they're not. They know me and they like me and they're nice people and they're normal people. And so why am I thinking that actually? Um, that classic, like, so am I the problem? You know what I mean? Kind of ended up um, making like projecting a bit a sort of air of intolerance that isn't actually there, and realizing like, wait, why am I doing that? Why do I have these preconceived notions about what people who are Christian or maybe conservative in certain ways or have a different spiritual lifestyle than me that isn't this sort of liberal, secular, postmodern, post-capitalist, whatever, post-meta narrative, life that I live, which we all exalt as somehow more advanced or more developed than people who are, super religious or who reject certain facets of industrialized and digital technology. And I was just thinking that, one of the things that the Iran war is teaching me personally, because I'm not religious, but I have been finding more and more of a reverence for religious thought and spirituality. Because, it's very interesting that Iran, a nation which is deeply religious, they are deeply, you know, their government is based on an Islamic faith, a Shia faith. So, but they've also molded that with a state, a revolutionary state, and also molded that with their Persian culture and heritage, for this, civilization, which has come in many forms and empires and nation state, and so I was thinking about how powerful that is in the face of the American edifice of what we think the American or Western project is, which is no longer Christian in any sort of way. I mean, maybe Christian in the sense of it's Christian Zionist fascist, or something like that. But even those people don't actually, Trump is depicting himself as Jesus on Twitter, but does he go to church? Does he read scripture? Does he do Lent? No, not really. So we're divorced from we're divorced from tradition, maybe. I'll say that, because, and I think people. This is the problem: is in America, people they blend tradition with conservatism. They think just because it's traditional, or that this thing's been done for a long time and is kind of revered as been doing it this way, then it's inherently conservative, it's inherently regressive, therefore inherently oppressive, therefore. And I get that critique. I'm sure there's a lot of women in hyper-religious sects that might be characterized as cults. You know what I mean? Talk about Latter-day Saints, right? I'm sure there's some people in the Amish, in Pennsylvania Dutch Mennonite community that, are getting married off very young and having, very maybe abusive generals. But on the whole, for some of these people who are thriving in certain ways, how can we say that this is necessarily regressive or oppressive, when compared to our culture? What is our culture now is pedivore, right? Raping, pedophilia, the exaltation of buying and selling things and accumulating things for money and capital, which leads to the things I just mentioned, which leads to putting a price tag on every single thing and trying to sell things, this downward spiral of, oh, we only really believe in accumulating for ourselves, accumulating money, power, land, people, human capital, natural resources for ourselves. We don't have any sort of spiritual, any sort of traditional, any sort of cultural heritage that we exalt, and we don't question them. We don't think of anything as self-evident. Even that's from the Constitution, right? We believe these truths to be self-evident, right? We don't have any unblinking faith in something historied and storied that we think is undeniably good and true. We have completely dashed and destroyed all of those traditional, cultural, religio, ethnic meta narratives for good and bad. But what we're left with is greed. Is greed, gluttony, sloth, lust. Is these impulses, these emotional impulses to just hoard and to fuck and to eat and consume and to produce more and more and more and more and to accelerate and make things more and more extreme and extreme and extreme. And I think that's unhealthy. I think that's cancerous. I think if you look at what our society, the West, Europe and America, and associated nations, what we export around the world is not much products, and it's a lot of death and destruction. It's death and destruction, financial schemes, what else? Insurance and software. Great, all the things that are really great for the world, all the things that everybody loves, and so the only way you can view that as sort of progressive is if you view hoarding markets and finding the best and most wide-reaching globalized schemes that you can in order to accumulate cash, materials, resources, people, whatever, at any cost. If that's all that you value, then this is the promised land, of course. It has to be said. But you can only just value those things if you value nothing else. If nothing else just means nothing, it means nothing, right? And it's sort of nihilistic sociopathy that has taken over our society and our leaders especially. And I think it's funny because I almost wanted to just start asking these people questions, these Amish and Mennonite people, and I didn't really want to do that and be like that guy that's like, so do you guys use computers? Well, you don't, because I don't really know anything about these people. Same with Iran. We don't really know much about these people. All we know is the things that we see on the TV. This huge media complex that is shoved down our throats, and we've never, most Americans have never met an Iranian national and asked them how do they live their life, and do they feel free, and what are the facets of the cultural bounds and norms there. We just watch CNN and we go, they had the Basiji morality police, and they're policing people's they're policing people's their dress, and they can't show parts of their body, and all right, parts of Sharia law aside, let's just take this from a very rationalist perspective. The reality is women in Iran aren't getting stoned for showing their ankles or their hair. That's not the reality. The reality is, not to say that in a certain sense that characterization is not present or a problem in certain parts of the Muslim world, but that would be like, the Gulf countries, not Iran, but um, you know, there are laws about your clothing in America. So like everyone's running around naked in America. You can't buy things in a store, no shirt, no shoes, no service, right? You can't, if you go in a store without a shirt, even if you're a man and you're like on a run, you're sweating, a lot of people won't serve you. Like that's a law. You know what I mean? Somebody might be like, oh, that's, regressive because what if you're homeless and you don't have shoes or whatever, blah, blah. But it's like, that's our cultural norm that we've decided this is our limit for covering yourself up in public. There's nudist colonies, sure, they have no limits or whatever, or certain limits that seem less, that are more open than ours. But I'm sure if you talk to the average person who's like even, Western, liberal, progressive, whatever, they wouldn't want to go live in a nudist colony, and you can't just go around exposing yourself in this country. Like, you can't just be in a playground with your dick out. You can't just walk down the street. That's indecent exposure. It's a law against what you wear. Like, so we have laws against what we wear too. So, and it's not so extreme, right? That people think like you're gonna get the death penalty if you show your hair. Like, that's just insane. Like, that's something that just people have just made up to like villainize these people. It's just, you realize it's just a different culture. And I saw someone the other day. I don't know if they're Iranian, probably not, but they were some sort of Muslim practicing, Islamic faith practicing person, Muslim, and they're basically just wearing a normal outfit that a Western woman would wear, but with tights and a niqab, right? So like I don't really see, it's not that crazy different if you really think about it. You know what I mean? Like, it really isn't. And is the West really someone to talk about women's rights? Because I know a lot of women who, well, let's just say this, I've dated a woman who used to have a sugar daddy, a sugar father, which is, let's be honest and call it what it is, one step removed from prostitution. An older gentleman with a lot of money who is obviously some sort of creep and weirdo freak, who paid her to go on dates with him to be seen with a hot young woman, And I was younger at the time, so I thought, oh, nice, yo, get your bag, you know what I mean? All right, buy me some food off of that rich dude money, whatever. But this man was paying for her college. This is crazy, This is crazy. This is not necessarily a girl who grew up, with want, right? She grew up in a nice household, actually outside of D.C., Alexandria, Virginia. Her mother was divorced, but the very high up in a government agency, let's just say that. And they had a nice house, a nice, but she, the state of the economy is such that, why would she be, asking her mother to pay maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars, let's just be real, for her college, working part-time jobs, taking out loans to pay for her education, when you could have some old kind of weird, whacked out, freaked out dude, take you out on a few dates, if college was so affordable that you could do a little bit of work on the side to pay for it, like it was in the 70s, and support yourself and go, and you not even have to think about the market, just go do your, like, she was an art student, right? She went to the new school, right? So do your thing, like people used to go to college and like do, oh, I'm going to study, like this is what my uncle did, like study abroad in India, and I'm going to do, write my thesis about like religion and culture over there. And he just used it as like a vacation. And he came back and they were like, where's your thesis? And he was like, I didn't write it, but I had an amazing experience. And they were like, all right, sure, we love you. You're so funny and goofy. It doesn't happen anymore. Like, people go to college and they're like, all right, I need this degree, need this degree, need a master's. It costs $1 million. How am I going to do it? Let me sell feet pics. Let me go on OnlyFans. This is a real phenomenon. It's very striking. A lot of women are doing this. A lot of women are considering this in some sort of dipping their toe in, right? Literally, maybe the selling feet pics. That's a classic route in. Maybe doing softcore porn. Maybe having even just, a Fansly, a Shopify link, right? An Amazon wish list. There are doing Twitch streams. Just looking kind of cute. A sort of softcore version of this that is. Not necessarily. I'm not going to say that makes you a prostitute because that's insane. But these are steps towards what a lot of women have done, which is to say, my economic prospects are such in America that it will be. If I'm thinking like the economic subject, like the Ayn Randian subject that I am, what is the least amount of labor I can put in to get the most amount of return in the market? It is to sell my body in some sort of way. It is to commodify my love, my body, my whatever. And people only consider that because the economy in this nation is such that is the not even one of the largest markets, but one of the easiest markets to break into. And in a place like Iran, tell me what do you think is more freeing? A person who has never considered that in her life, but has to wear a hijab? Or a person in America who's thinking like, oh man, my friend who went to school, got a doctorate, got a PhD, and she can't get a job now. What am I going to do? I've got $100,000. I know people like this who got $260,000 worth of loans they have to pay off. And they work nice desk jobs that pay a good amount of money. They made it, but they still will be in debt for the rest of their life. I mean, for them, with an American market that's such based on lust and pornography, if they can sell some feet pics, if they get really desperate, they may do OnlyFans, right? And a lot people don't understand this. This is not some red pill thing. This is very bad. A lot of women consider this, and it's sold as empowering, which is the most contradictory part. Selling your body because that is the easiest, most direct route to economic stimulation for yourself is seen as liberation. And that's what's so backwards about here. People look at an Amish woman or a Mennonite woman who has to wear a long dress and put their hair up in a bun and a bonnet and slaughter chickens all day, and probably will get married young. Probably that's true. And probably will have children with a man who's, maybe 10 years older than her. Maybe that's true. But, can choose what she does. Doesn't, necessarily is at the whims of the market. She's in a community of people, and like, all right, there's some sort of conservative values there, but like she has a family, a community, a village. She probably works the land. She's probably very productive. Isn't that what most people want out of life? So who is more free is basically the point I'm trying to get at here. I think for a lot of us in the West, we really have to think about that. I'm not saying I'm going to become an Amish person. I'm not saying I'm going to move to the woods, become the Unabomber, and be a Luddite, or turn into some red pill hyper-conservative. No, I'm actually very, married to secular, nation state, modernity in a way. I actually quite am. But I think, and this is what I think you learn from the Amish and the Mennonite, there has to be limits, because this dude Amos, he calls people, on a phone. They drove here, they didn't take a horse and buggy, so, but there's limits, there's limits to it. He's not going to be, on QuickBooks all day. He's just not, He's not going to have a Google Nest thermostat in his home. He just doesn't. So there's limits to technology, modernity, liberal democratic culture that they let into their community, and I think their community has been long lasting. It's been sustainable. So there's a double valence to it. There's, in one sense, you could look at it and say they're stuck in the past. In another sense, you could look at it and say everyone else around them, us, has gone crazy. Look at what I'm doing right now. Podcasting. Talking to myself on a screen. So other people who I've never met. Right? Like, that's crazy. And they are living how most people have lived for the vast majority of human civilization. So who really is the crazy person in this situation? Who is really the one that's gone to the extreme? I think a lot of people in this nation need to evaluate that, because there is this hubris about our culture, and our culture really is devoid of anything of value and meaning. To be quite honest with you, I'm not going to say that there's no value, no meaning. I consume a lot of media. So obviously I think some of it's valuable and meaningful, but on the whole, the contributions America has made to the world, I would say have been, in the last 70 years, have been negative, extremely negative. I mean, I think there was a figure that just came out that was like, I don't know if I'm going to butcher this, but millions of people have died from sanctions alone. Sanctions that we put on, unilateral sanctions, which is, it's hard to kill millions of people in a war. It actually is. If you kill millions of people in a war, that's a very big war, or genocide. But sanctions can kill millions of people like that, like quite easily. And that's what we've done, That's what we've done, and most people don't even realize it, But that's what our culture has produced. I can sit here and be like, oh, I don't support that. I don't, and a lot of people can sit there and be like, I didn't even know that was happening. That's bad. But at the end of the day, that's who our leaders are, and that's what they do. So we do have to take some sort of responsibility for that in some sort of way, and reevaluate our culture, I think, because I think there needs to be a meta-narrative above accumulation, basically, and I'm a Maoist, and so I think that meta-narrative has to be based on economics and investment and Marxism at the end of the day, but it could be religious. It could be some sort of cultural thing, geographic, tied to land, right? So there's a lot of things it could be, but there needs to be a meta-narrative that is not just some sort of get everything, step on everyone, get your bag, do whatever it takes, There needs to be give your life, sacrifice it for the greater good, for your community, your culture, your history, love your neighbor, these things that you don't find in Western culture anymore because they're tied to these things that we've killed off with markets, We've killed off religion. We've replaced that, with our sort of weird fascist state, and our entertainment, our Hollywood, and our exaltation of goods, and products, we don't. So we don't have that guiding light. In China, there is something above the market. I call it the last nation state in the world because, at the end of the day, the state can dictate what the market does, and it will put people in jail and it will execute them. That's just the reality of it, if they don't do it. And that's because that state is built upon a Marxist-Leninist Maoist revolution. So their state is based upon certain principles that the government, which represents the citizenry, the people who live in the country, will take precedent when and where necessary over the market and private interests and people who own private property and land and means of production and are hold positions in market or finance or real estate or whatever, because they value that more than accumulation, and they value their Confucius history, their Chinese history, Confucianism, that's cultural, their meritocracy, that's cultural, right? So they value that, and it's not subordinated to the markets. Iran values a religious authority, the Ayatollah, over certain political authorities, right? The Ayatollah gets to say, we are not going to, make a nuclear weapon because I deem it immoral. Not because it's rational or irrational to make a nuclear weapon. I deem it immoral. So the political question is, it doesn't matter what the politics about it thinks, because the politics is subordinated to a religious faith, which is good. It's good. There's been great outcomes. Do we want Iran to have a nuclear weapon? I think, to be honest, that would be good for them. Look at North Korea. Look at Libya. Libya gave up their nuclear weapons. Country destroyed. North Korea developed nuclear weapons quite quickly. Never been attacked. So, but I don't want nuclear proliferation throughout the world if we don't have to have it. I mean, the Middle East is a very violent place, mostly because of us, Israel, Britain, and the Gulf countries and our partners there. But if it were to be violent and nuclear arms, which it is because Israel has them, but if Saudi Arabia got them, Israel, Pakistan are the only two ones who really have them, right? Israel's already such a wild card that that's horribly destabilizing for them to have that, because they're the ones who might actually use them, But if Iran got them, and Saudi Arabia got them, then Egypt got them, then what's next, So we're already breaching mutually assured destruction. Russia's first strike capabilities have been targeted by Ukraine and Europe. And that's a country with one of the biggest nuclear arsenals in the world. I think the biggest nuclear arsenal in the world, compared to even America and China. And even them, they're having, that used to deter an offensive strike on your country. It would be like, oh, I have nuclear weapons, so don't try it, because I'll throw a nuke up at you. And then you'll throw one back at me, and we'll all die. So if you do it, you're going to die too, But now it's almost like the Europeans are calling the bluff on Russian nuclear doctrine, because they're saying, like, if someone just sends a drone in there and nobody says who it is, did it really happen? If we just send a drone to take out your nuclear, strike bombers, which under the NPT have to be out in public so that people can monitor it with satellites to see if you're going to do a nuclear strike. If we just do that, but we don't take credit for it, we say it's these crazy people in Ukraine probably, and that's a whole different thing, and whatever, blah blah blah, then can we maybe expect that Russia will go, oh, okay, well, I don't know if that's really a retaliation, because they're not really saying this or that, so do I really so they're chipping away at mutually assured destruction now, So that's very concerning, because it means countries that are nuclear armed are now going to, you've opened Pandora's box, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. You've opened Pandora's box to say now you can have kinetic warfare between countries that one or both of them are nuclear armed. And once you step on that escalator, The end point may very well be nuclear warfare. It's it seems like an insane thing, but we're getting closer and closer to that. And Iran is only as rational as it is right now because they have certain pious religious authorities. I think the West could learn from that. The West is condemning the Pope or whatever. Pete Hegseth, they're saying things like they're going, he better quiet his mouth or they'll depose the Pope, basically. Or I don't know if that's Pete Hegseth or someone in the Pentagon, right, had a sort of row with the Pope because he said something about, how bad the Iran war is and the Gaza genocide, I think, and that's very concerning, very concerning. If the Pope thinks that, which is good, religious authority to say something like that, and America's, a so-called like conservative Christian nation, you'd think they'd listen, but instead they're saying, what, no, actually, we will depose you if you keep, these positions, because actually, even though we're irreligious and evil, we pose as our own sort of religious authority, and we take that the highest moral authority, the edifice of religion, and we use that mask for our colonial projects around the world, to do conquest, basically, to rape and pillage. I don't think that's more progressive in any sort of in any world. So I think we can learn. I think the West people in the West need to wake up and understand that, And I think to people who are in the West and who are religious and are actually like nice, good people who are conservative and not the conservative that are like, I love Israel and I want the cops to like beat the shit out of people and I want to like do wars, conservative that are like, I think we should like get back to the land a little bit and we should like be going to church and like probably like, studying scripture more and, revering things that aren't sexuality and money, and we should be revering God and his teachings and I think if any of those people are watching, they'll go duh, But the reality is, most people in America, most people in the West, have no clue about that idea. They have no clue, and I think we're starting to wake up to that. I mean, I've obviously been, since my degeneration as a leftist out of the Democratic Party has woke me up to that, But like Tucker Carlson is, one of the biggest advocates for Gaza right now. I mean, that's like so unprecedented. Who would have thought that, AOC isn't, she's trashing Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is a conservative who put her whole career on the line and killed it, to try and expose the Epstein conspiracy. Besides maybe Ro Khanna, who is also sort of a fraud. I mean, look at his position on the Ukraine war. But besides Ro Khanna, name me one Democrat who's really done anything to that scale. I mean, I can't tell you. I can't, So these people who feign sort of progressivism and, anti-racism, anti-capitalism, whatever, who are in the mainstream, they're all frauds. Let's just be honest about it. And it is weird how the only few voices, Thomas Massie, Marjorie Taylor Greene, coming out of it, maybe that's just because it's a Republican administration, but the only few real voices, speaking up, doing anything of worth, are from the conservative side. I think that's very interesting. Someone who's a Maoist. I think that's very interesting. And the people who are these sort of secular liberal Democrats have to contend with that. They have to contend with that. If they don't contend with that, there is no future for their party or their beliefs. I think Donald Trump is slowly flushing that down the toilet, the whole MAGA ideology. But I do think it's going to start to ping pong again back from worse Democrat to worse Republican to worse to people who are going to be pushed to the edges, right? They're going to be pushed so far to the edges of the political Overton window that, and this is maybe the real political horseshoe, is that in the middle of the horseshoe is a centrist, a Democrat or Republican, and then further away is like a MAGA, a social democrat, and then further away is like, oh, okay, now I'm a libertarian, sort of, Alex Jones conspiracy theorist, and then further away from that is like, oh, I'm like a socialist, or a communist, but they're really like a Trotskyist, and then further away from that is like, actually, the people who run the government are all pedophiles and we do wars that kill people, and we just want to like have investment for our schools and our cities and our rural communities and our roads, and all these people who are in government left and right probably need to be tried and hanged for like war crimes, and they come back around, through, I would say, class consciousness. But I'm sure the other person who went from the other side, I went from the left side of it, the other person went from the right side, I'm sure they'd call it something else, anti-globalism or anti-elitism or populism, what have you. But I think that convergence is becoming real. I think it's becoming real, and I think liberals and centrists always sort of, what they sort of do is they characterize that convergence, that horseshoe theory, in an inverted way, and they say, actually, the people who are so far left, who are communist tankies, and someone like me, like a Maoist, who's a Stalinist, whatever, you guys have just become authoritarian dictators, and the person who's on the right, who's so far right, you just become Nazi authoritarian dictators, and that's why you have to be in the center, and you have to do little things. We have to do procedural little things. We have to do these reforms. We just have to get past this reform, and then maybe we'll do another reform in 20 years, and everything will be fine. It's like, no, it's it's actually quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. The people who are in the mainstream, political scene now are doing things totally inconceivable and totally irrational, starting War of Iran with no premise. That's what the Republican Trump administration did, starting the Ukraine war and the Gaza genocide, aiding and abetting that, which led to drone strikes on the nuclear triad of Russia, one of the largest nuclear armed countries in the world. These are extreme and irrational things. And on the both sides, you have someone who's like a Bernie crack going, I think we should just have free healthcare. And on the other side, you have like, a Republican being like, I think we should stop the war in Ukraine. Very simple reforms. And so I think this horseshoe theory is it's slowly getting inverted as both parties become more and more extreme. And I sort of do wonder what Trump is going to do during the midterms, because I think he's going to be so totally defeated and dashed. But I also think the Democratic Party is such a lame duck that I'm not sure where else they go from here. Donald Trump, if he really did his MAGA thing, like his first term, which wasn't pretty by any means, I'll just be honest, as someone on the left or whatever that means anymore, I remember him assassinating Qasem Soleimani. I remember, his federal agents kidnapping people in the streets, Portland, Oregon. So I'm not going to say it was good, but he did not start any foreign wars. That's good. This time around, we've got quite a few, Venezuela, Iran, right? So, continuation of Gaza and Ukraine. So he's completely imploded his whole movement. And on the left, on the Democratic side, not the left, the Democrats, um, you've got, I mean, a destroyed progressive socialist movement, Maybe Mamdani has some sort of swag, some sort of cachet now because he hasn't 100% sold out. I mean, he did do a photo op with Richie Torres, and he's very close with Hochul. So I'm very very skeptical of that, But he seems to be doing what I predict. Well, I predicted one of two things: that he would be number one at AOC type sellout, or he would be like a Mayor de Blasio, where he'd just be like, all right, what small little things can we get and just make it the most normal we can sort of do it, and maybe do some sort of PR stunts on the side and just get these small little wins. He's starting to get the small little wins and do PR stunts, So maybe there's something there. Maybe there's something there that's not totally 100% sold out and corrupted, but I'm not holding my breath. But if you look at the rest of the Democratic field, I mean, AOC, that's horrible. Recently calling out MTG, as we spoke on, who, obviously, sacrificed her whole career to expose the Epstein elite. What has AOC done? She's done nothing of the sort. She's voted for the Iron Dome and then cried about it. Like, okay, you're a loser, votes for the Pentagon budgets. So she's a fraud. I don't think anyone... I think she's maybe got more of a chance than like a Kamala Harris or a Hillary Clinton does, or a Warren, but still, it's just, I just don't think it's there. It's just not, people just sort of know, even if they don't know consciously, they sort of unconsciously know that moment has passed and it has become a bit of a sham. So I just don't think the energy's there. Bernie's like old, he's done. They scammed him out of it, and he went along with it. So he's a fraud too. And he still sends me text messages, and I'll never give to him. I mean, I gave him a lot of my time and money, and labor and effort. And I feel scammed. Yeah, I feel schemed. I feel like I was funneled into the Democratic Party as someone who really opposes almost everything that organization stands for. So where do they have to go from here? I mean, they could have a slam dunk if Mamdani finished off as mayor and he ran as president, and he really actually did some like democratic socialist reforms, some simple things. That would be a slam dunk, because Trump is destroying the economy. The global war, basically, we're in World War III. Sorry, we are. It's undeniable. And he doesn't care about his own base anymore. So he might be impeached. He might die in office, get 25th Amendment, or be impeached. J.D. Vance is such a lame duck. I mean, he's proved himself to be ineffectual. Same with anyone else who might have, taken Trump's place. So where does the mainstream Republican Party have to go from here? I don't know, but the Democrats would have a slam dunk if they could run someone who would actually be against the things he did, but no one in the Democratic Party is actually against the things he did. They're just against how he does them. So we're at a standstill in American politics, and I don't know. I'm not sure what the solution is. Unfortunately, this is why I'm an accelerationist, because I think the solution is that there needs to be a collapse. There needs to be a total and complete collapse of the economy, which will create a total and complete collapse of political support for either parties. And then there needs to be a real life movement for alternative parties that are nothing like the Democratic and the Republican Party. Um, but that's hard. That's hard in this country, and structurally, sometimes I do think like, will America structurally ever be able to get out of what it's in right now? Because I was reading, speaking of Libya, I was reading Gaddafi's Little Green Book, and he talks about how um, basically like a country is like a house. It's built on a certain foundation. You know, and he argues representative democracy is inherently anti-democratic because you have, you know, someone who you elect, who you say, oh, you're going to represent us. You elect them, and then what? Now you have no sort of recall over them. They're just, it just creates these schemes. I'll just say whatever you want me to say to get elected, and then I'll go do whatever I want to do for the elite Epstein class and myself, and I don't represent you, because you don't make decisions. And basically his point is, in Libya there was a lot of people's councils, So his point was more direct democracy, And then you also have China on the opposite end, which is, no, there are a lot of people who aren't elected, they're appointed. And they have the total state control over certain facets of the government, But because they are unmolested, by popularity, they can do things, they have more latitude to do things. And because there's only one party and there isn't like all these, elections going on, they can't just flip-flop from parties and be like, oh, well, you're doing a bad thing. Oh, you did a bad thing? Yeah, well, you're doing a bad thing. Oh, no, I'm doing a bad thing. Oh, yeah, well, the other guy do a bad thing. It's just the government. If the government doesn't work, people will hate you, and they'll riot and they'll do these things. So they have to get their act together. So these are the two spectrums, these sort of orthodox, like we need the state to be strong against the markets and even against media and popularity. And the other spectrum, which is we need a lot of actual direct democratic people, direct democracy, people in committees who actually live on the ground doing these things, making decisions, in their own districts and villages and councils and cities. And America is the in-between, and it's the worst sort of centrist position of that. It is like, well, we have elections, but they elect people who go somewhere else and we never see and are never held accountable, until they become horrible people and we realize that they're horrible people, and so we go run to the other party and do it all over again. And we elect them because we think they're the exact opposite of them, and then they go off somewhere and represent us, even though they don't, and they represent a class of people who's paid them to do certain things and given them certain policy papers. And then after, 2 or 4 or 6 years, we realize how horrible they are, and we get upset with them, and then we go run back to the other party, and we do it all over again. It gets nowhere. So can we fundamentally change who our leadership is? And by who, I don't mean necessarily the person, but I mean the type of person our leaders will be. Can we necessarily change that with this system? I think that's another thing that we're starting to realize in the West. Liberal democracy as a governing system, Congresses and parliaments and senates and Supreme Courts and all these, and then, whatnot, and that we thought this was, more civilized than the Ayatollahs or the tribal leaders, but is it really? Is it really? I mean, because look at the outcomes, or look at the outcome, who versus American presidents, versus like Chinese premiers and presidents. I mean, Xi Jinping writes books. Like, do people understand this? He literally writes books on Xi Jinpingist thought, which is adding to the history and this ongoing meta narrative of Marxism, Marxist Leninism, Maoism, Dangism, whatever, Xi Jinpingism, Hu Jintaoism, all these people, they're adding to this huge, written history of thought and analysis, just like religion is, right? Just like culture is, It's this 1,100 years long history of thought, and debate and back and forth and analysis and ways to live. And he writes volumes and volumes of this stuff trying to push forward his sort of, socialism with Chinese characteristics. And our president reportedly doesn't even read anything. He's a TV president, right? They show him a video, allegedly they show him a 5-minute video reel of that's his daily briefing. He doesn't even read a condensed report. He doesn't read, okay? It's not that he doesn't write books. He doesn't read. This is a sad state of America. I mean, I was reading, Gaddafi's little green book, but I'll admit too, I am like this, okay? I am semi illiterate as well because I spent so much time on the internet and watching things and passively experiencing information come into my brain, And what happens is that when you're just bombarded with all this information that's being, showed to you, not actively comprehended, showed to you, and a lot of it is contradictory. A lot of it changes so quickly that as soon as another thing happens, the last thing is totally gone, is completely destroyed as if it never happened. That this is the mental lifestyle of a Westerner now, is that information it no longer has a truth value to it. It's just information, and the only information that is more true than other information is the most recent information. I truly believe this is how we've been conditioned now, and that's why Trump acts the way he does, because he can say a thing and it's a feedback loop with himself. He makes news by saying things, and then that's on Fox News, and then he watches Fox News, and then somebody in the Pentagon, tells Fox News to say this, and then they show him a briefing of that has a video of Fox News, Brett Baier or something, and then he makes a statement based on that. Not based on reading a book of analysis of Iranian history and their war fighting practices. Nothing of the sort. So that's why it's so contradictory. And people think, how can he say one thing, do another thing, and then say completely the opposite thing, all within 48 hours, sometimes within 3 hours. Sorry, my printer's going off right now. Well, that's how the Western mind works now, is that there is no truth. There's just information and never-ending cascade of information, and the newer information always supersedes the older information. And there is no true information. You can change on a dime from one piece of content to another piece of content to another piece of content. And for you, that is reality. That's objectively, that's what we think reality is the latest piece of content, whatever that's telling us. And it's led to such a deep series of delusions that we are now, we're now where we're at. The world is going to go into a deep economic crisis with or without the Iran war ending. Because we already have at least 6 months worth of oil infrastructure work to be redone, rebuilt, completely refashioned, if the Iran war ends right now, and even still we'll have shortages, and higher prices. Brent crude is, let me see what it is right now. Brent crude is, I'm assuming 110 or something above 100. 109. That is roughly $50 more than it was before this war started. It was at $60. Now it's at 109. So I don't think that's transitory, as economists say. I don't think that eventually the Strait of Hormuz will be back open again, and the UAE will be able to get all its oil and LNG out, and same with Bahrain and Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. I don't think we're going back. We're not going back. Iran holds all the cards in the Strait of Hormuz. I think oil is going to be above $100 a barrel, and it maybe breach $200 a barrel within the year. Forever, maybe for the foreseeable future, for maybe our lifetime. And then I think we will be at war with Russia. We are. There's war in Mali right now. These are all connected things, and they're not going to stop. They're not. Oh, it's the Iraq War. It's the surge, and it'll end. Afghanistan, we got out, and now what's our next thing? Vietnam happened. That was horrible. We got out. No, it's not. There's no sort of normalcy that will come back. I think it will continue to devolve, and I think people have to realize that that we are in World War III. There are large political, economic, and military blocs which are fighting each other in new ways that we have not seen before. So that's why people don't think it's World War III, because they think, oh, well, sanctions isn't war, blockades isn't war, someone throwing some drones at people isn't war, fighting off terrorism isn't war, but it is. This is all sixth-generation warfare, alternative warfare, proxy warfare, dirty warfare, whatever you want to call it. It's happening in the Sahel. It's happening in Western Asia. It's happening in Eastern Europe, Venezuela. It's happening in Northern South America. And I think it will only spread, I think, because for America, this is our Suez Canal crisis, and this is our crisis of legitimacy for, are we able to fight off not just a large power, but a mid-sized power? That's what Iran is right now. It's becoming a superpower de facto, but are we able to fight off a mid-sized power for a sea lane that our imperial power projection usually controls, the sea lanes, And if we can't even do that, then the emperor has no clothes, because then who else can fight us off, Brazil, South Africa, Egypt maybe. I'm sure they can put up a good fight. A lot of them have larger, large standing armies. A lot of them are probably buying drones and missile technology from Iran and China and Russia. And they've seen the playbook now. So if we can't establish deterrence against Iran, and I wouldn't even say deterrence because we were the one who started this, if we can't defeat them in some way, rebuff them, then everyone around the world will notice that and say, oh, well, what are we doing, acquiescing to American threats when they can't beat, not even China, Russia, they can't beat Iran. We might have a chance. We might fight them on this. They're trying to do an IMF loan on our country. No. And in earlier times, people would say, oh, it's the American military. What are we going to do? They're whispering. They're scared. They're quivering. That's what Venezuela did. We'll sell each other out just to avoid a kinetic conflict with this huge military that we think will probably destroy us. Well, now what? You know, you've seen what happens when a country fights back. They win. They're winning. They're winning, and they're dismantling America, not just in and around Iran, in the whole region. So America, if they are to be an imperial power, they can't let that go. If they aren't to be an imperial power, they will let that go, and they'll come back to America and reinvest in America and become a multipolar power. But if they were going to do that, they would have done that, I don't know, probably in like the 90s when the Soviet Union fell. So they haven't done that. Everyone in America is still drunk on power. They think, the hegemonic moment isn't over. It's over. It's over. It'll never be, it may never come back for anyone. Maybe China will have it, maybe Russia, but I think it's over because technology is advancing and diffusing to the point where China has technologies in their production systems where they have factories which are almost fully automated, and they produce, stealth jets, not just missiles, stealth jets. I think the J-20, J-26, can't remember. Recently I saw a report that they're able to increase production rapidly because they have applied AI to their production, and we haven't done any of that. We've applied AI to what? Produce slop, produce more content, which is what we think reality is. China, they think commodities are reality. That's the difference. A real physical thing versus I'm doing it right now, making content. That's the difference between the West and the East, China believes in producing things. Russia believes in producing people, they have the best people, America believes in producing fantasies, delusions, schemes, gambling, gambles, parlays. And so they'll ultimately be defeated because, things and people will always be able to defeat idea, a movie or something, some sort of mental media manipulation, like you can try and make the best propaganda in the world to convince all these people to be on your side, to be scared of you, to be subordinated to you, and they can mentally think that, and that'll influence their actions, but at the end of the day, if you don't have the resources to keep that up, if you don't have the food, the gas, if you don't have the military, the people, then there is no game to be had. You lose. There is no propaganda that can replace, a stealth jet or a hypersonic missile. There's no there's no media warfare. There's no that can replace that, or men on the ground with guns and tactics who have been raised to defeat evil. It's like you can't beat that with soft power. So I think America is running up against that delusion. Can we create our own reality by making content, making statements, making stock trades, gambling, acquiring money for myself and my family? Can we make that reality out of thin air, which we've been doing for a while? It's somehow been working, Or will we lose simply by the number of personnel, the number of physical commodities produced against us, raw materials that we can't source? Who and what wins out? I think reality wins out. Reality always wins over narratives. That's why the podcast is called The Death of Narratives. Um, and so I think America is waking up to that. I hope to see more and more people have their delusions um, dashed, because it's not good living in a society where people are very delusional is very weird. It's very weird. As someone who is interested in truth and reality, and some sort of ideal of facts, logistics. What is the best way to do this? What's the most sustainable way? How can we do this the longest? Versus, how can I get mine? How can I extract the most? How can I court social capital for people to give me things for doing nothing? That's the mind of the average Westerner. It's very concerning. It's very disconcerting. Yeah, I hope everyone got something from this. I surely did. Trump is in China right now. Maybe he'll be able to get them to buy some of our LNG. Maybe he'll be able to get them to buy some of our agricultural products, our grain or whatever, our pork. Maybe not. Will he be able to do anything else other than that? I highly doubt it. And I think he has become the fool, the laughingstock and fool of the world. Whereas, he already was, but people at least knew he's unpredictable. So maybe we can work with him because he's so unpredictable. The Biden, Kamala Harris, Clinton had Obama, Bush's. You sort of know there's a neocon plan there. There's a sort of, liberal interventionist plan there, and they won't stray from that, So you'll never be able to really do anything. But Trump is unpredictable. So maybe you can turn the situation around on a moment's notice to get some sort of outcome you might not otherwise have gotten. Well, now that doesn't seem to be the case. Now it seems like he's so chaotic, and he acts on a whim as if someone with dementia who doesn't remember what he just said or did or where he's at and gets angry, that it seems like there is no negotiation there, that he's not negotiation capable in any sort of way, any sort of fashion. America doesn't seem negotiation capable. So in lieu of that, and since he can't surrender their imperial conquest to try and rebuff Iran, I only foresee more escalation, even though it doesn't make sense at all. I can only see more escalation as a product of the position that both players are in. It's like a game of chess where pretty much you're going to lose, so you start making more and more bold moves and sacrificing things and trying to bait, the other player to make a mistake as sort of a last-ditch attempt, because you're just not going to resign, because you have a lot of hubris, But it's either you resign now or you lose and sacrifice many, many, many more pieces before you either resign later or get checkmated. And I think that is basically the scenario that Donald Trump and the American foreign policy establishment is in general. It's called a zugzwei, I think. Pepe Escobar made this comparison. It's like a zugzwei when there's no, any move you make leads to a bad outcome in a chess game, And so they're just starting to be like, well, what if we did this move, and that's making it worse? And they go, what if we made this move, and that's accelerating more. And what's making this move? Because they'll never concede. So the only option to not conceding is just making it worse, unless they just do nothing, which is kind of what they're doing now. They're sort of muddling about, We have a ceasefire, but we have a blockade, but we're not really doing anything. We kind of took over a ship from China, but that's Iranian, but we're not really doing strikes because we can't. But rest assured, if they rearm, they probably will, and like they did before. And then what? If we look at what happened from the 12-Day War to now this war, the 44-Day War, what's going to happen the next time? In this war? We went from a couple strikes on nuclear facilities in Iran and some missiles in Israel that penetrated their Iron Dome, which was unprecedented. Whoa, that's crazy. That's unprecedented. Whoa. To closing the Strait of Hormuz, destroying America's capabilities to operate any bases in the Western Asia region, the lifting of sanctions for Iranian oil exports, the Americans they aren't even thinking about nuclear deterrence with Iran anymore. That's not even on the table because there's so many other things now that they're trying to claw back from them. So yeah, it looks like Iran basically accelerated the downfall of the West in the Middle East and Western Asia. And I think if there is to be another move, which I believe that there will be, that the move that will happen next will be so much more groundbreaking that it may very well plunge us into a global depression. It may very well collapse Israel as a state as we know it. And unfortunately, I think it's unavoidable with the caliber of people who run our nation. And I think, unfortunately, since we can't structurally reorganize our whole country without a revolution, that we will continue to put those people into power. And so that will continue to accelerate things. So, good luck. I don't know. I think next is coming is like some sort of COVID on steroids, and I think you see that with the hantavirus, Indian hantavirus or whatever. They want to do another lockdown, maybe it'll be a climate sort of lockdown, maybe it'll be an economic lockdown. Maybe there'll be oil shortages soon enough, there will be maybe famine, fertilizer shortages, food shortages, transportation limits, workday limits, currency limits. I think this is a short intermission from what happened with COVID. I think COVID, and it's why I've been my mind has been very confused about this period from about 2022 to 2020 to now, I guess. But I think the Iran war, thankfully, unclouded a lot of things that I was confused about. Which is to say, how could it go back to something like it was before? How is that possible? How could it not continue to degrade and collapse? I think we're going to go back to that collapse, and I think this period, this period itself will be quite an aberration as well. I think people don't understand that this weird in between. I think people thought COVID was an aberration. No, I think COVID is actually normalcy in a way. Because we had to contend with the political internal forces actually in this country. And Donald Trump wasn't doing as many wars. And there was a whole American reckoning of what the future of America is on the streets. And there was guerrilla warfare on the streets. Unfortunately, I do think that needs to happen. I think that's far beyond actually needing to happen. And I think the more and more we put that off, the more and more worse the situation is going to be than COVID. because COVID was bad, but I think this next thing will be even crazier, which is my prediction, I guess, in a way. It's been my prediction for 4, 5, 6 years since COVID. But I don't think people necessarily understand that. It doesn't, in the West, they don't understand it. They don't get it. Even if they know that the economy is bad, they don't get how fake it is. And they don't get how much it needs to collapse in order for something to replace it. They just don't understand. It doesn't, so ultimately all of this is good, but it's going to be a very hard time coming through it. We'll have to go through World War III, New Depression. We'll have to go through all these things. It's going to be a lot of growing pains, There's going to be a lot of people who thought one thing and realized the exact opposite. So, yeah, that's about it. I think I talked for a while. This is the first YouTube live stream. I'm gonna try to get Conrad back on. I haven't talked to him in a while. It's just been so busy. I've been working 12-hour days. He's working a lot, I'm sure, or maybe not. Goddamn economy's about to collapse. So I don't know how many rich people are going to be building houses soon. So we'll see. But I haven't really gotten to contact him in a minute. But I miss him, and I miss our conversations, and I'm sure things will get turbulent again soon. Yeah, just hoping everyone out there listening and watching is staying sane and healthy, and that you buy gold and silver, and that you move to China if you can, because they're the future. And if you can't, know your neighbors, know your community, your local citizens, grow food, have a plan, have a water source. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to be doing prediction. I mean, that was my whole prediction spiel before that, but I don't really have acute predictions anymore. I think since the onslaught of happenings have calmed down, I don't have as many predictions anymore. Unfortunately, I've just been more reflecting on life here. So, but leave a comment, if you want to hear stuff, if you want to hear more concrete predictions, because that was fun, but it's so fickle nowadays. And then nothing ever happens is kind of set back in, but give it a few more weeks. I think it'll come back. All right. Thanks everybody. This has been Phil, the Death of Narratives podcast, episode 9. Catch you guys next time. Peace.